What we have here is a resin kit, SD Glaug, or however you pronounce it, from Macross. And they usually come in boxes like so. Hopefully, inside the box, you have the parts that come usually in a bag. I've previously already worked on this, so I just kind of rebagged it as an example. And most resin kits come in such a bag, and sometimes they have runners, and the instruction sheet for most of these kits is like so. Not really much of an instruction sheet, but the kit is simple enough and you can look at all the little parts and figure out what goes where. So first thing I usually do when I pull these parts out of the box is kind of cut off some of the excess nubs, because these are usually casted in some sort of way. I've already done some cleanup on this kit, so you'll see that some of these have pins in them already. So I'll explain to you that pinning process. Usually 1.2 or 3/64 inch pins. Now, usually your standard pins or pin vise set, you're not going to get 3/64. You have 5/64 and 1/16. So what I have here, I bought a 3/64 size bit to match up with these 3/64 pins. So this is basically the pin I use. Now, pinning process is to add strength when you're putting these kits together. So say that you have these leg pieces that come together, and without these pins, it just kind of sit in there, and you glue them together, but you not have enough strength when you're doing this. So what the pins do is they add some strength to this. So when parts come together, it's held up with a little bit more strength than just the resin pegs. So again, most of the hard points I will pin, such as these legs and feet. Arms are usually also very important to the pinning process. And I'll put this thing quickly together, get a general idea of what it starts to look like. So again, pins, and kind of put the thing together. Some of these small areas where there's it's kind of thin to pin, just go ahead and kind of drill out that hole a little bit so that these things just fit right in there snugly. Now what I use for this is quite important. I have a caliper. Now these are useful for finding out exactly what size holes I'm going to drill. For example, this. I can find out the exact size hole I'm going to drill measuring this pin, like so. And then I have my, drill set. I can measure out, does that fit? No, that doesn't really fit that well. So I could use maybe a 5/64 bit, and that fits. So I know that this is the size I could use. I could probably go smaller and then worry about a snugger fit, but this is pretty loose if it's in there. So once I have all my sizes figured out, I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of put this guy together quickly. I've already done all the work and pinned these, and what I use, as I remember this, is a pin vise. Now, where's that drill bit I had earlier? So this would basically be my drill bit, and I would drill into these like so. So now that I have some of these holes drilled out, I can start kind of putting this guy together. If it'll stay together. Now for some of these parts that I don't have pins, but they're just gonna kind of sit here. They're not load-bearing pieces like these, thruster areas. What I like to do when I'm test fitting is use a little bit of sticky tack. Where's my ball of sticky tack I usually keep around here? That's my disorganized area. As I look, oh, there we go. So I usually have a little bit of sticky tack, and all you have to do is rub this between your fingers. Stick this like so, and you have the sticky tack attachment. And generally, I like to put this thing together and kind of look at where areas I need to work on, gaps that possibly need to be filled. These are the marks and whatnot. Also figure out a pose that I can put this kit in. Once I'm done with that, take it all apart and start sanding some of the seam lines. Not seam lines, but mold lines that are on here. Start doing a kind of a quick initial sanding. Now this quick initial sanding takes care of most of what I can see on the surface. Priming will show up more of the other problem areas. I've already picked up some of the problem areas, like some of these bubbles right here that will need to be fixed. There are a few other areas that have problem areas, but not too much. This is a pretty clean cast. So you notice resin is also a lot softer than plastic. So when you're sanding, you have to take some care when you're sanding so you don't sand too much of the details away. When these parts are all sanded, they're ready for a bath.
Okay, now what I have here is an industrial cleaning solution called Purple Power. You can use simple green and whatnot. And on these parts, there's usually, once you get them out of the bag and initially sanded, they still have some mold release on them. So what I usually do is I just dunk them in here for about overnight. And since I've already cleaned this, I don't need to let it sit there that long. But the idea is I dunk them in here overnight and let it sit there for, to degrease it. Now, mold release is kind of helps it come apart from the mold, so it prevents anything from sticking to the surface of the plastic or from resin. So if you try to paint this without removing the mold release, you're gonna run into all sorts of problems with paint peeling off of the part. Now this stuff is undiluted, so it's pretty strong. So I use some tweezers to pull them out of here. I like to usually rinse them first, and then into my ultrasonic cleaner this goes. I use my ultrasonic cleaner to scrub this. What this does is this scrubs my parts and makes them nice and clean. Gets rid of all the excess purple power that might be on the surface. And in lieu of this, you could grab your trusty, toothbrush and run with some dish soap and scrub your parts. But I find that because I'm so lazy, this process works better for me. I just throw them into the ultrasonic cleaner and it cleans everything for me. Now once out of the ultrasonic cleaner, I usually let the parts sit on a piece of paper towel and dry. Make sure everything is completely dry before moving on to the next step. This doesn't need to sit there too long, so I'm going to go ahead and take this part out and let it sit on here and let it dry.
So now that my parts are dry, I could go ahead and make sure everything's separated. And now that everything's separated, I could go ahead and put these on individual skewers. I have alligator clips on skewers that works to hold parts like so. And then I could go ahead and put them on my wood block and get it ready for paint. And now these parts are ready for initial priming stage. Okay, now I'm going to start my priming process. So I have a Mr. Resin primer that I've been using on resin. Supposedly this grips a little bit better than Mr. Surfacer. They don't mix well, so they are definitely different formulas as opposed to just something bottled differently. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix this up. Now, you also notice that I'm using a stirring rod to mix up stuff. You'll find that when you open your bottles of paint, there's a lot of kind of paint that settles to the bottom. And if you just sit there and shake the paint, all the liquid moves, but then the stuff that's at the bottom doesn't move that much. So it's always good to use a metal stirring rod or even a bamboo stirring rod or something like a skewer to mix this up. Now I've already pre-thinned this. What I like to do is I pre-thin my paints so that I don't have to worry about thinning them every time I work at this. You notice I'm swirling this around, and you'll see that it just kind of coats the surface of the bottle and drops down. This is about the consistency you want to use for your paint. So there's no specific ratio. I'm going to test it out of the airbrush, and if it sounds good out of my airbrush, I'm going to use it. A true test of whether this is too thick or too thin is a test spray. Oops. I'm making a mess of things. Always a good idea to clean the rim of your paint bottles so that when you screw on your caps, it doesn't dry and stick together. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick spray test. Check my PSI, raise it to the appropriate level, about 22. And I can tell that this is nicely thinned. When I spray out the paint, I'm not hearing a high-pitched squeals, and the paint's not splattering. And it's not hitting the surface and running, so it's not too thin, it's not too thick. So it's about right. So I'm going to go ahead and start priming. Grab my first piece. Now what I do for airbrushing is I'm just going to start off with the light misting layer. Notice the distance between the airbrush and the part. And I'm just going to do a light mist layer. Now if you look closely, you'll see that there's tiny little dots on the surface of where the primer is hitting it. Now you want to do this because if you just go in here and spray directly, paint's not going to really stick to this surface. So once you have those dots on, you can go closer and you can spray heavier. And the paint has something on the surface already, so it's going to stick a lot better. So notice I'm going in closer, I'm just spraying a little heavier. I'm spraying to a point where it looks almost wet, and I'm stopping. I'm also moving my airbrush around a lot, so I'm not sticking on one particular area too long. So spraying enough just to coat this, as this is, again, this is the first priming session. There will be other priming sessions depending on how clean I got the surface or how much surface work that needs to be, done after I'm done, or after I spray this part. Now what this does is this does several things. This lets me see if I missed any sanding areas. It lets me see all the little defects on the surface. Lets me see pinholes, and also gives the surface a nice layer for paint to be built upon. And that's one part that's done. Okay, now that my parts have dried overnight, I could go ahead and check for any errors on these parts. So I'm going to start off with this piece right here and just kind of look at what the priming's done. You can see maybe a little bit of air bubbles here, and these need to be addressed with a hobby knife. So I'm going to grab my trusty hobby knife, and some of these bubbles you can only see when at certain angles, when light hits it just right. So I'm just going to run my knife and kind of pop those holes open. Now the reason why I'm popping these holes open is because what we see is just the surface of the bubble. Anytime we're working with the recast, we're going to run into these issues. For this purpose of this, I'm going to use light curing putty. And to me it doesn't make this anymore because apparently one tube lasts forever. So notice I turned out the lights slightly so it's a little darker. And interesting. It used to come in like a black plastic bag. So I'm just gonna crack this open. This is a brand new tube of this stuff because my last tube I've been using for literally years. I finally finished using it. What I find when you first open one of these bottles is it's going to be a little kind of liquidy, so you want to mix it up a little bit so it's a little bit more pasty. And notice I'm sticking my skewer down in here. Now, so long as you keep out of ambient light, you can work with this stuff decently. I'm just gonna apply. This is not the best tool I'm gonna use to apply, but since I have all this putty on here, I might as well. So I'm just kind of coating this here, and we'll work on one side first. Get a piece of paper, paper towel to clean off my skewer. close this up, put it back in a box so we make sure that we don't get light in there and cure a whole tube of this stuff that I can't buy anymore. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn on the light and let this cure. So I'm going to focus the light a little bit on here. And since this is a new bottle, I'm not sure how long it will take to cure up. But you can always test with the little skewer and kind of poke at this. And poking at it, it looks like it's wet, but it's really cured up. Now once this is fairly cured, light needs to penetrate through this. So if you're drilling like a very, very deep hole, you're not going to really fill it that well. So usually I take a piece of paper towel and clean off the excess liquid, and we have something that looks like this, and it's very, very strong. It's very resin like. See, it kind of filled in some of those holes, and immediately I could take my sanding stick and start sanding away. Now generally you want to apply a little bit just to fill the hole so you're not sanding too much material and you're not wasting too much of the putty, but I really just use very little putty in here. And then you can see how this stuff lasts quite a long time. Trying to get kind of close to where I want to be, so I'm just going to start employing the sanding pads. And the finer side of the sanding stick. So you see the stuff sands pretty much like resin, and you should notice that it cured very quickly. I mean, you can check the timing on the video, see how long it cured. I didn't do any camera tricks or pauses or anything like that. Of course, when I'm editing this is a whole different story. So I'm going to go ahead and get this as finely sanded as I can. Again, it would have been prudent for me to not use so much putty, but that was what was on the skewer when I mixed up the putty. So a little bit more sanding work than I wanted, but you can see that even still this process makes a pinhole filling go by really quickly. You can run your finger across this and see if you can still feel it. the holes. I'm going to go over with another putty session after I'm done, or not putty session, another priming session after I'm done puttying all the rest of the holes, and we can check if I filled the holes in properly, or if I need to still touch it up. And then we have this piece. Not too long of a process, but I could go ahead and fill the rest of these up. Now, next step, I'm going to go look at some of these areas where I might have missed the sanding. So if you look at this part, it looks pretty clean. Mold lines are gone, but if I turn it to a side, I could see that there's a mold line right there. And you know, it's a little hard to see it at this angle, but at this angle, you can see with the light, you can see where that mold line is. Now, this is one of those things that, you know, the priming stage really helps find. So I could go here and I would start, you know, using this sanding pad and sand that away. And so long as that is gone, I could tell that that line is now no longer there. So this is one of those things that is nice about your initial priming stage. It tells you where all these little missed defects you can see in just the off-white resin. Going with the finer sanding pad. And that's fixed. You can see that it's no longer there. I can look for other mistakes on this part. See, there's a missed area right there. You can see that a little bit of a line there. So that's a quick, easy fix. A couple of swipes of the ink stick or sanding pad, and you fixed it. Again, maybe at the corner here. Now you don't want to sand too much because you'll tend to round off some of these hard edges, which you don't want to do. So in that case, you might want to just sand like this to make sure you keep those straight, sharp edges. Sorry about that. Notice that there's another line right here that I missed. So since this is at an angle, I'm going to see if I could get that just like so. With resin, it's really easy to remove some of the fine details because the resin is so soft. Okay, so now that my parts are all completely worked on with the putty, you can see that this piece here is a lot of pinholes were filled here. So one of those tests to check if the pinholes are completely filled or if you have lines anymore is to do like a quick light check. So if you twist this around in the light, you can see whether the shadows of anything hit. And you can see kind of a shadow if you didn't sand it correctly. Now, second test I usually do is a fingernail test. I'll run my fingernail across some of these distinct pinholes that I filled. And if my fingernail is not catching on anything, I'm pretty sure that it's covered. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and get these parts second priming session. And with that, we are done with the second priming session. So these parts are gonna sit for overnight.